Alrighty, so I wanted to make a tutorial on how I make my contact poi. The last several weeks I've been seeing a lot of contact poi that are falling apart for various reasons, and mine, knock on wood, haven't fallen apart on me yet, so in years. So I figured that I would put this out there so that people can know how to make some poi that won't come apart on them after 6 to 9 months. Um, the method that I use is I'm going to drill a hole through, cut a slit, and then the slit is going to be our working space. We'll pull the rope through and use this, and we'll close up the slit in the end. There are a couple places that, in fact, there are several places that simply drill the hole and then shove a knot through. So with this one, you can see, well, I don't know, maybe you can see, this cracked. I was trying to shove a knot through and it cracked. That happens sometimes if you try and shove the knot through. Even if you don't get the crack, you end up, if you can see those, see how there are tiny little cracks on the inside? Even if you don't see the cracks on the outside, there are going to be cracks on the inside if you just shove the knot through. So don't do that. Even like pairs of poi that come from shops that just shove the knot through, they're fine when you receive them, but after 6 to 9 months to a year, they come apart. There are several places that every pair of poi I've seen come out of that place have fallen apart, and it's not right. That doesn't have to happen. So let's look at how I make my poi. 100mm ball, some rope. I get my rope from rainbowrope.com or sometimes West Marine, depending on what I want. Palm from Lantern Smith. So that's what's going to make up our poi. Tools, you need a pair of scissors to cut the rope. You need a pair of needle nose pliers to pull the rope through. I like really long needle nose pliers because it makes it easier. Need a drill. With a drill bit, I usually use a bit the size of the rope that I'm using. The bit will appear to be smaller than the rope, but that's fine because the rope will smush through the hole and everything will be cool. You need a razor blade to cut the ball. You need some tape to tie off the rope, to tape off the rope so that when you cut it, it doesn't come unraveled. You need some super glue to glue it up, and this is the stuff I use. It's Loctite Gel Control super glue. It's the best that I've found. These little buttons on the side allow you to squeeze it out so you can control how it's coming out, and it's a gel, not a liquid, so it doesn't get all over the freaking place like most glue does, and it holds. You need a piece of a sponge to wipe off excess glue, and then it helps if you have something to then wipe the glue off the sponge onto. And also, let's see, need a lighter to melt the ends of the rope with. So let's first cut our rope. I've already cut this rope, so you can see that there is tape on the end. I didn't melt the end when I was finished with it, but I always tape my rope to keep it together while you're cutting it, otherwise you risk losing the end of your rope and having to recut. So what I do when I make poi is I always leave enough for people to decide how long they want their poi to be, and so I use quite a bit. I go from my fingertips to my collarbone, and so that's what I'm going to use. I know that looks kind of long, but once you tie knots in, it shortens down to about that, and that's about what I use. So I give people about what I use. I'm 6'4", so I use quite a bit more tether than most people do. So anyways, I've got my point here. I measured from my fingertips to this point on my collarbone that I have as a measurement point. So I'm going to take this, keep that point, take some tape, wrap some tape around the right side of that point that I want to cut at, and then also wrap some tape around the left side of that point that I want to cut at. Like so. So I'm going to cut at that black part right in the middle there. So you take your nice little pruning shears and you hack your way through, chop, chop, chop. You melt the ends. And you are now good to go. Normally you would do that twice, but I'm only making one poi for demonstration purposes. So now I've got my piece of rope. I'll leave the ends on because when you're, I'll leave the tape on so that when you're grabbing and pulling through you don't mess up the rope too much. So we've got our rope. Now let's look at our ball. I make my cuts on the seam. I use the seam as a navigation point so that I can find the bottom, the perfectly opposite side from the hole I drilled. So we're going to, and I use, it super helps to have drill bits that have a pilot tip on them. So otherwise, any other kind of drill bit will just walk away on the ball, like it'll move on the ball. So it helps to have the pilot tip. So I will drill through. I'll lose my bit. So we drill through, ream it out, and you should have a nice hole there. Then you put your finger on top of the hole. I then take my razor blade and I draw a straight line, whoop, all the way down until I hit the seam on the underside. So there's my point on the underside of the ball. I am going to then cut along the seam. I use the seam as a guide, so I cut a straight line, and also depending on the color of the ball, you can actually hide the cut on the seam. So, put my cut on the seam, being careful not to slice the hell out of my thumb, because that totally happens. So you make a point, then you cut to the right, then you cut to the left, and I make small cuts because you don't want to cut too far. So there we go. So now I've got, you need about 2 inches, or depending on how big your pliers are, your pliers need to be able to fit in comfortably. So I probably made that one a bit bigger than I needed to, but it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. So we've got this now. We've got our hole. So we can stick our pliers in. They come out the hole. We stick our rope in our pliers and we pull it through. So usually what I'll do is I'll leave a little bit of rope in there just so that if the client wants, they can change the length of the poi later on by simply slicing open the slit and moving the knot. Now my pliers are pretty dirty because I was just using them for something else, but so it's leaving some marks, but whatever. So anyways, we do that, and then we take and we put the pliers through the top of the palm. We grab our rope, we pull it through, we tie a knot. Usually I'll leave space out the top as well so that people can mess with the length when they first get the poi. So right there's a poi. Bam, done. So all we have to do is seal this up. And this is where there's another person who's making poi right now that is using the slit, which is great, but they don't seal it up, which is bad because these, like if I were to squeeze this ball and just work it a bunch for the next minute, I could make these ends of this slit move another couple inches in either direction. So over time, the slit will continue to open up. So you really need to close it. And really, when you're putting the glue in, you have to be super careful to get glue all the way into the corners, because if you leave a little gap in the corner, the slit will continue to spread out from that corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this glue, we put it on one face of the slit, just wiggle it back and forth, make sure to get it all the way into the corner. And then the real test of whether or not you got enough on there is when you squeeze the slit together, do you have glue coming out everywhere all along? And the answer is yes. So we take our nice little wet piece of sponge, we wipe quickly, and we've taken off all the excess glue. This stuff dries uber quick, so it only takes about 30 seconds for it to dry. And there you have a poi. Since we didn't put any stress on this hole, there are no slits or no like micro tears on the inside of this hole, so this will never pull through. And unless you really, unless you like beat on this and sit on it all day long in a sideways direction, this is never going to open up. In fact, already you can see that it's holding together. So that's how I make my poi, and it's never let me down. I've been reworking a lot of people's poi lately who have come from other vendors, and I've been having to retether them and drill new holes in the heads because the old holes have cracked because people just shoved the knot through. So I highly recommend this way of building your poi. It's super simple, and I find that it lasts the longest. So if you have any questions, feel free to message me. And yeah, happy poi making.